someone is presenting with borderline personality disorder traits or complex PTSD. I now have a cat that's going to annoy me for the next hour. We'll look at why that awareness is important. Then we'll look at these presentations from a psychological or a psychiatric perspective. And then we will look at how we can apply RT to this group of people to help them affect change. So borderline personality disorder and complex PTSD, most often when we have clients present to us, they can generally identify what they're ready to change, and we can get on with helping them do that. So why are borderline personality disorder type presentations or complex PTSD from childhood any different? To understand this, let's look at some of the potential leftover effects of working with particularly vaded states in complex clients. So vaded states are states, just for a quick recap, vaded states are states that when they come to the conscious or the executive, they bring with them a SEM or a sensory emotive memory, which has been experienced back at the ISE, so the initial sensitizing event. This means that the person feels the often overwhelming emotional experience that occurred back at the traumatizing event. The vaded state feels as though the ISE is happening now in the present. Generally, it's the case that the emotional response is over and above what the situation would call for from an outsider's perspective. So the standard protocol for working with RT is to ask the client, what are you ready to change today? Presuming the client has some idea regarding this, we would proceed with diagnosing the pathology of the states or states involved, and we would then work through the actions required to reach a place where the states return to healthy and normal. We know that in a situation, if someone has a retro-avoiding state, then we know that we need to first work with the underlying vaded state. In fact, we know that regardless of whether it seems to be conflicted or dissonant or retro, regardless of which states are involved, if one of the states is connected to a vaded state, then we know that we need to work with the vaded state for any resolution to be maintained. So any work that we do, we need the vaded states worked with for that work to sustain itself. So all going well, the vaded state is resolved and the person moves on in life from an adult perspective, so from adult states perspective. They're no longer affected by the vaded state coming into the adult world to find resolution. Here's my one screen share, which hopefully I can work out how to do that. Just give me a second. So I think if I put that there and then, oh, shooters.
Screen button and make sure it's.
Yes, share screen. Aha. Oh my gosh, look at that. So this is my, can we see my photo?
Yep.
Yep.
Aha. So this is my favorite photo. I wish I could give whoever doctored or took this photo credit. I have no idea who it was and I haven't been able to find who it was. But what I love about this photo is it's a really great visual representation from my perspective of what a resolved vaded state looks like on the inside. So here is our resolved vaded state who used to be hurt and is now happy, and they're doing something lovely on the inside, swinging on a swing. Here's the adult world. 2020, welcome. Here's the adult world. And here are our adult surface states who can deal with the adult world. This state here that used to be vaded is so happy on the inside, they do not give a crap about what's going on here in the adult world. And so they happily stay on the inside because they're not trying to come out to find resolution.
Because they're no longer vaded, isn't that right? They're back in the
Yeah, when they're resolved. Yeah, correct. Because they're no longer vaded, that's right. Now, how do I get back here? Stop share. That looks about right. Okay. Oh, I'm becoming a pro at this computer business. All right. So, all right. So in an ideal world, This is what we would do with people who present with borderline personality disorder and complex PTSD. However, the one main danger, well, there's many dangers, but if we link it back down to one thing, generally I find that the danger with this group is that they often lack strong, resilient adult states, or states who can sit in uncomfortable emotion knowing that they're safe. So let's look at what a borderline personality disorder presentation looks like. Please note, many of us have some of these traits. It doesn't mean that we're borderline. It just means that we have some of these traits. So I'm going to go through mainly the ones that exist as borderline rather than the traits of straightforward PTSD. I know that sounds terrible. Straightforward PTSD obviously is easier to work with. It's when we've got the issues that often children grow up with from experiencing trauma, that some of these issues happen. So people with BPD, complex childhood trauma, often present with an intense fear of abandonment that can be real or imagined from an outsider's perspective, obviously not from the client's perspective. They often engage in particular behaviours which we might call manipulation to avoid this fear and abandonment. They often have a pattern of unstable relationships where they swing from idealising a person that they're in the relationship with, romantic or otherwise, to the belief that they can't trust and that the person that they were idealising now doesn't like them or thinks that they're horrible. They often see themselves as innately bad and undeserving or not important. They can have ongoing feelings of emptiness. Nothing is ever good enough. They often engage in risky or impulsive behaviour such as gambling, unsafe sex, drinking, drug use, drug driving, sabotaging successes, perhaps in employment or in relationships. And of course the stereotypical symptoms, suicidal and self-harm behaviour and feelings of.
It's pretty intense in there, isn't it?
So we also have wide mood swings from this group, from intense happiness to shame, anxiety and extreme overwhelm. They also lack affect regulation, which means that they get overwhelmed quickly and enter crisis states regularly. Unfortunately, due to many years of struggling with their emotional states, they often struggle with financials, jobs, relationships, housing, security, and so on and so forth. And so these crises are often really real and the cycle just keeps perpetuating itself. Inappropriate anger, by inappropriate I mean that anger doesn't appear to fit the situation from our judgmental stance, obviously. Faulty belief systems, believing that somebody else is responsible for how they feel. Now, whilst it's by no means necessary that people with BPD traits have experienced trauma, it's certainly true that in my experience, the large majority of the client group I work with in this category have. I don't think I've got anyone at the moment who has been diagnosed by somebody else who doesn't have a childhood fraught with trauma.
A lot of ACEs, isn't it? The adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah. Marsha Linehan, who is the dialectical behaviour therapy creator. I was going to say person, but you know, she was a bit more than that. So in her skills training manual, she actually cites that some of her studies show that 75% of people with BPD have experienced childhood sexual abuse. There is which obviously I need to note this. So there is another set of life experiences that can lead to BPD type presentations. And they are sometimes the children who've been cotton wooled as children. This sometimes leads to adults who have little resilience and therefore find it particularly difficult to also sit in uncomfortable emotions, as well as adults who are shocked at not getting things their own way. I experienced this group of people much, much less. However, when I used to work in private psychiatry, there were certainly people that seemed to fit into this group. I wouldn't be surprised if further along down the track, we were to find that they too had experienced trauma. However, certainly they were presenting as though they hadn't. And so obviously we just need to make note that that can sometimes happen. So I am, primarily I'm going to be talking about the people who've experienced trauma, but certainly some of the techniques can be applied to those who haven't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through those same symptoms again, but this time I'm going to go through them from an RT perspective. So we've got people who present with intense fear of abandonment, real or imagined. So we've got evaded with fear or rejection, and often more than one state. Often they engage in manipulative behaviour to minimise the feelings of fear and abandonment. Retro-avoiding states are the ones that are engaging in that to try and reduce the inevitable fear and abandonment that they believe is going to occur. Inherent difficulties with emotional regulation, which I'll come back to later. This is numerous faded states with minimal adult well-functioning states to be able to pick up the slack. Patterns of unstable relationships, swinging from idealising the person they have the relationship with to the other end of believing that the person is untrustworthy or horrible. So here we have what I see as protector states, who I actually see as retro states. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Anger is one example of that. So basically, if somebody's in a relationship with somebody and they believe that that person cannot be trusted, instead of, I see it that they have got sort of two choices. One is they can feel hopeless and helpless, and the other is they can feel angry. Most of us don't like feeling hopeless or helpless. And so at least angry is not great either, but at least if we're coming from an angry perspective, we feel empowered about it. Okay. The idealizing as well can also be a protector state, as they're trying to keep a person from abandoning them. And so by internally idealizing them, then it puts them on a pedestal and they can feel comfortable in the fact that, you know, they're so amazing, they're not going to be abandoned. And so that eases any of that, that sort of emotion, those faded states bubbling up as well. Unfortunately, as is often the case, these two extremes that they will often swing from actually creates a situation in which they then feel abandoned. Obviously, people who are not also coming from that perspective really struggle in relationships with people that are. And so obviously the relationships often don't last, but probably even more dysfunctional is that they will often have relationships with other people who have the same stuff going on. And so it's a recipe for disaster sometimes.
Isn't it like that traumatized people attract other traumatized people? It's like a repetition, as Freud called it, the repetition compulsion.
Absolutely. So they often see themselves as innately bad and undeserving or not important. Straightforward, baited with rejection. I'm not good enough. This can lead to projection of you're not good enough also. Engaging in risky or impulsive behaviours, gambling, unsafe sex, drug use, driving, sabotaging success. So seemingly straightforward, again, retro avoidance, especially for those ones that are obviously retro avoidance. Sabotaging success, I believe, is also a retro avoiding protector state, because if the state sabotages the success, then it is easier to deal with than the actual abandonment, which they believe will inevitably occur. So if the state sabotages it before it can occur, then at least they can fall back on that, knowing that they didn't want that success anyway. It's easier to deal with than their inevitable fear of this is going to fall apart anyway because of me.
And that innate belief system, isn't it? See? And it just proves me right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep. Suicidal and self-harm behaviour and thoughts of. So retro avoiding. A state that engages in suicidal behaviour has energy to do that. I rarely find that the state that is suicidal is actually the state that is vaded with fear or infection. I generally find it's a retro avoiding state. It's avoiding by having a way out. If I've got a way out, then the vaded states that come up, they can come up, but the person is like, I've got a way out. There's a way out. There's a bit of hope in that.
Like an escape behaviour, but the ultimate escape.
Yeah. And as I said, I rarely find that it is. The only time I might find that it is the actual state that is vaded with disappointment. But then really, if I look at it, I still generally find that it's another state, because the state that can engage, the state that can come up with a plan and put it into place has energy to do that. A state vaded with disappointment doesn't have energy. Self-harm, contentious opinion that I'm about to make. Self-harm is generally retro avoiding. However, I have more recently in my years seen this to be retro original. So I have young people who have picked up self-harming behaviour off their parents. I also have young people, and this is really quite disturbing. There's on Instagram, there's some interesting groups of self-harm photos where it's good to post your best self-harm photos. I have some clients who I've got clients who I don't think would have engaged. I don't think they would have started self-harm behaviour had they not connected with other people who were doing that. Yes, they've got some other stuff going on and definitely would have required therapy. However, certainly I can see that is how it developed for them. I also, just further to that, I often see that a behaviour that started as retro original can very easily become a retro avoiding behaviour. Now, yeah, so that self-harm example would be a good example. So it might start as a retro original behaviour and then become a retro avoiding one, because the person works out that it's a really great way of stopping where they're at. The other ones are even rage. Rage is often a retro original behaviour, but certainly I've seen in some adults that it moves into retro. What did I say it was? Retro original normally. Usually, often I've seen in adults that it moves into retro avoiding. So it's just started as something that didn't have a vaded state underneath it, but the person's worked out that it becomes a good coping mechanism. Lots of the stuff in anorexia nervosa fits into that category too.
And wouldn't it be skin picking, hair pulling, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
That is the sort of thing that little kids, because I'm seeing like a
It starts off as self-soothing.
and then it becomes problematic because it's so in habitual. I agree with original. I think, and so I think we're shifting and changing in resist therapy. Right?
Yeah. Often, I mean, not often, always. If I've got a retro behaviour, I will always look for a evaded state underneath that. So I will always check out whether there's a evaded state. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether it's retro original or retro avoiding. If you confuse a retro original for a retro avoiding, then it doesn't matter. You just end, if you bridge back somewhere, you just end up at a benign experience. It's I guess, therapy progresses less easily if you confuse a retro avoiding for a retro original, because obviously with a retro avoiding, we're just renegotiating the role. But with retro avoiding, we know that we've got to resolve the evaded state underneath. So I just always look for evaded state just to check that out anyway.
That's mine too, actually. I'm training like that now too. I'm saying to people, it's easy to just use that behavior to bridge back and deal with any evaded states if there is. Because even in a retro original, I want to see when you're saying yes to, because there's a reason this part is performing this behavior, and it's because some emotional response is being kind of sidelined or something's happening. There's an unmet need.
Yeah. So wide mood swings, from intense happiness to shame, anxiety, and complete overwhelm. And again, that lack of affect regulation. So we've got all types of evaded states could potentially be here. Evaded with disappointment, confusion, or as a child, evaded with fear or rejection, or all of the above. Basically, they are overwhelmed because they are trying to deal with the adult's world from a child's perspective, and that's obviously going to be completely overwhelming if we look at it from that perspective. So they're stuck at the initial sensitizing event, trying to gain resolution. So when they're triggered into the adult world, they bring with them the SEM into the conscious, and are trying to gain resolution, but obviously can't because the situation is no longer, it's not happening anymore. The childhood situation isn't happening anymore. The adult one is, obviously. So inappropriate and intense anger. By inappropriate, I mean the anger doesn't appear to fit the situation. Retro avoidance is generally my first hypothesis with anger. Going back to earlier, I often see it that, and obviously I'm seeing, this is a very basic summary of how I'm seeing it, but client often has two choices: hopeless and helpless, or angry. And absolutely, there are definitely people who go to that passive response, but often people don't. And so again, I will look for evaded state underneath that. There might not be one, but there might. Rage is often retro original state. However, again, I'll check out to see if there's evaded state underneath. It doesn't take long to check out if there's evaded state underneath. And so, and also because I learned ego state therapy, and none of the word for them now, sorry, the terminology, none of the terminology existed when I learnt. And when I learnt, basically you bridged everything. And so what happened is that I got really good at bridging, but also what happened is that it meant that I guess, saw different things happening in people. The other thing is that most of my clients are fairly long-term. Given that a number of my clients are this presentation, we can see why they would be fairly long-term. And so I guess what the benefit of that for me is that I get to see over a period of time if something has or hasn't worked, rather than the client not coming back, which often other therapists will get. my clients tend to stick with me a lot. And so I get to, I guess, have these internal hypotheses, which I guess I just get to check out, which obviously a lot of other people don't get that option. So the faulty belief systems of believing someone else is responsible for their emotions. So I see this again as retro-avoiding. This state prevents the client from undertaking an honest evaluation of themselves because of the underlying fear that they're not good enough or that they're a horrible person. So by blaming others, they don't actually have to do this self-assessment.
Okay. Oh, I want to hear some more about that.
I could probably do an hour on every single one of those symptoms. So I'm just going to move on to what some of the intricacies that exist for this client group and why straightforward RT is perhaps difficult. So the main issue that I come across is often clients don't have a lot of healthy adult states, as I noted before, or states you can sit in uncomfortable emotions knowing that they are safe. So with this group of people, even if a evaded state is resolved, so say we jump in first session, resolve a evaded state, and we're leaving the evaded state happy and healthy on the inside. I'm not talking about re-traumatizing. We've done the work and we've left the evaded state happy and healthy on the inside. Sometimes the mere fact that we've done something different on the inside is more uncomfortable. This group of people often can't even handle that level of being uncomfortable. So secondly, the resolution of these states for this client group is not linear. It can be really quite messy. This means that one evaded state affects another and so on and so forth. The resolution of one evaded state upsets the apple cart, if you like.
So there's kind of like a state of equilibrium in that imbalance of, you know.
Correct. Absolutely. Yep. Correct. Yep. So there's elements of family systems theory that I really love, and there are some really beautiful ways that it applies to a person from a resource therapy perspective. And so basically from a family systems theory, when one state is resolved to normal and healthy, this means that it has an effect on the other states that are intricately linked with this state we're working with. And remember that the states, they're not linear, they're really quite messy. Mr. Messy often pops up in my head when I think about that. So basically, often for this client group, whilst there are many states that are not healthy, as Philippa just said, the reality is that they've spent many years trying to keep a lid on this system. And whilst it might not look healthy to us, they've been surviving with this dysfunction. And so when we start to unravel that dysfunction, sometimes that in itself is too uncomfortable for this client group to be able to deal with. So within these webs are often multiple layers of protector states who I put into the retro state section. And the reason that I do that is because they are trying to protect other states. Because of these multiple layers of protection, sometimes the evaded states are actually really tricky to access. I will talk...
You might want to... Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Philippa, what? No?
No, I was going to... You might want to say about the protector states and how they... But you're going to, I think I just... block. That's what you're saying. They block like the wall. Yep, sorry.
Yep. Which I'm going to explain like further. I'll give an example of that further, and I'll give you an example of how I deal with that further on.
Excellent.
Furthermore, once we have accessed the evaded states, even though we are resolving them, sometimes even after that work, the client can still feel quite raw. And again, that raw feeling can be too much for this client group to be able to integrate and work with and sit with. Further to that, even more, is often RT work with faded states can take a few days to integrate. Sorry, my cat just ran across the screen. So often it can take a few days to integrate that. And if a client is feeling spacey and not grounded, then often that is enough to send them into feelings of needing to self-harm, of being suicidal, of in crisis, and so on and so forth. So I believe that all therapists, another contentious issue, I believe that all therapists should have therapy. I absolutely believe that all therapists should have supervision, but I will go one step further, and I believe that all therapists should have therapy. I will not expect my client to do work that I wouldn't do myself. And so, given that that's the case, I know that therapy is tough. It's raw, it's emotional, it creates reflection, insight, and understanding, amongst other things. This can be really overwhelming for people who don't have a lot of healthy adult states. Especially also for people who present with these presentations. We can imagine that they don't have a lot of overly supportive people in their lives. And so when we are working with this group and then we're sending them back into the outside world feeling raw or having developed some insight into perhaps some of their behavior that perhaps they've just worked out makes life more difficult for them, we're putting them in a place that often they just can't deal with.
Oops, something fell down.
For me?
That's all right. Sorry. Hey, just what you're saying there too, isn't there, do you think, sometimes grief? I think because there's an adult part that just is kind of I've got clients stuck in a grief around what happened. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, you know, like I haven't even got to the beta states yet. You know, this is like we've got this before we even sort of get there. The other thing is that often clients in this group present in crisis after crisis after crisis, bless. And generally it's real crisis. You know, it actually is real crisis. Yeah. Whilst ideally it would be great if we could just ignore the crises and get on with the work. As a resource therapist, I know that if we go, yes, here are the crises, let's work with the states that we need to, what will happen over time is that these crises will become less and less because a person has developed more affect regulation and the ability to tolerate crises. Ideally, that would happen. However, when you've got somebody with this presentation who presents in crises, often you're their only support. And so I have had many sessions. Actually, now what I tend to do is a client will come in and they'll be in crisis. And if they're a client that we've progressed with RT with, I will usually say to them about 10 minutes in, what do we want to do today? I'm more than happy to keep talking about this, or we can do some RT. The only reason I'm asking them is I don't want to run out of time, because they can tell me for the whole hour about the crises. And if they want to, all good. I don't have an issue with that. But I don't want them to get to 55 minutes and then say to me, can we do some RT on that?
Get it up.
Probably me just trying to avoid that.
Actually, I've got clients like that, and you need to almost, I'm lucky at 90 minutes, because they will spend an hour telling you you've got 30 minutes to try and do. And and we've got to retrain our clients to the other way. Let's do therapy first, and we'll do a debrief as well on, you know, and I'll make that better.
And for the clients who don't present like this, that's not a problem. You know, I will, with my clients who don't present like this, I will absolutely be like, all right, I really want to hear about that. Shall we do an RT session first, and then we can do that? Whereas this presenting client group they're just much more fragile, even when they don't present as fragile. So back to protector states again. That's right, I forgot about this protector state. This is my favorite protector state. This is the protector state who, when you do get in and when you can get to the point where you're doing invaded state work with this presentation, my favorite protector state is the one who on the third therapy session decides that the best way that they can avoid feeling emotional is not to attend therapy. And so usually I've already preempted that. And I know that we can talk about post-hypnotic suggestions and all the rest of that, but generally what I find is that I've preempted that, and I've had the discussion with the client when we start doing this work that the first session is brilliant. They're all in, there it is, all there. Their protector states have got no idea what's going on, and so you can get in and do the work. The second session, they're a little bit more clued on. By the third session, they're like, nah, we know what's going on here, and I'm going to protect. And so often I find that that's where we get lots of those intellectual protector states coming out and again, blocking the therapy, which again, I'll talk about later. So even though we know that stirring up some of these states is to allow them to when we stir up these states, obviously we're doing the resolution work. We're not re-traumatizing. So we're doing the resolution work, and we know as therapists that we're then going to settle them back down in a way that is easier to deal with. However, with this client group, their inability to regulate their own emotions, it's really scary stuff for them. Mm-hmm. So also clients in this group have learned not to trust, or more accurately, they haven't learned what makes a trustworthy person.
Yeah, there's no boundaries, is it? They don't know healthy relationships. They know unhealthy. That's really familiar. And so that feels like, oh, someone who matches me.
Yeah, that push-pull, that push-pull feels familiar, and they have a belief that push-pull relationship is the healthy, that's a healthy relationship. And so so when it comes to the client therapist relationship, hopefully it's not a push-pull relationship. Sometimes a client might try and push you as a therapist into that type of relationship, because that's what they see as safe and secure. So hopefully this is where therapists have had some therapy and they can not take that personally. And again, contentious issue, because apparently I like them tonight. I have a lot of clients with these types of diagnoses who have had a lot of therapy before they get to me. And if I was to take it personally, every time a client did not turn up to a therapy session, I would not be sitting here talking to you about it. If I was to take it personally every time a client tried to push me away and get into that, I wouldn't be here either. And so often with this client group, unfortunately, and it is completely your prerogative to charge a cancellation fee. I want to make that clear. I don't have an issue with people who do charge cancellation fees. However, my experience is that with this client group, what ends up happening is they then come to me, and I don't charge a cancellation fee, and I enjoy my walks to the pier when a client doesn't attend. And so what that means is that what I'm hoping this means over time, and it certainly seems to be the case, is that because not turning up or because trying to push me away, or messaging me at 3 o'clock in the morning, to which obviously I do not respond, because none of that is making me say, making me then have to have a discussion with them about all sorts of stuff. I'm hoping that over time they learn that this is actually a really safe relationship for me. This is a different relationship to the ones that I've had where it's push and pull. However, that's interesting. Like, Melanie hasn't pushed me away. Like, why? Why is that? And so I'm hoping that over time, what that means is that we're able to further build up that that example of a healthy relationship for them, which then means that they feel more secure in feeling a bit more raw around me, because they know that I'm not going to attack them for it, which is often the experience that they've had. So how do we RT with BPD? Yes, Neville.
I'm not sure if this is appropriate to bring this up in this forum, but I'm just resonating with a client that I had where I was working in an organization that was very medically oriented, which was fine. I had this client that came in that was not diagnosed with BPD, but turns out there was behaviors that were moving more and more towards that position. And I didn't label them as anything, because it was just like, well, this is just the person, I'm just working with the person, and felt like I was building this really safe relationship for them.
Yeah.
And then the organization freaks out because this client has disclosed that there are suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
And then they jump on me to go and make sure that I have to go and have a safety plan and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting there going, everything in me is telling me that the client actually isn't going to follow through. There's something else going on, but the organization wants me to jump through all the hoops, which then upsets the client relationship. And then the organization puts me in a position where I can't stay and I have to leave.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. So, Neville, I work for myself for a very good reason. I wish I could offer some more, I wish I could offer some more on that.
All I can say is that I was just really torn, because the position that I was put in was that I was being treated as if I was not dealing professionally with the client, but the client was giving feedback to other members on the team that actually there was a very strong connection. They felt very safe. They wanted to keep working with me. They didn't want to go to somebody who was more medically oriented, and I couldn't stay because the position that I was put in. So then therefore the organization was then ripping away support from this person who desperately did it. It was like, it was really distressing.
Yeah, and that's absolutely my experience as well. And obviously, as I'm sitting here teaching, I'm very well aware that the line I should be saying is that you always need to check out if there's a safety plan, if there's a plan, and you always need to do a suicidal checklist. I'm very torn right now as to what I'm about to say. It's true. There are times that I don't do that. There are times that I know that my client will contact me if they need to. There are other times where I will. I have run the CAT team. Last week, I rang the police to get them to go and do a welfare check. But I don't think it's as simple as going, client says this, you have to do that. And so, you know, like, I think the person that I had to ring the police to do a welfare check on, I've been seeing her for 8 years. She absolutely, if any of my clients fit into this diagnosis, I refuse to put her in there, but she has a lot of traits. And so, excuse me. Absolutely. As I said, I used to work in private psychiatry. I've worked in non-government organisations. I've worked at public and private rehabs. So yes, I get it. For me, the answer is that I work with what I feel is the best way I can work with that client. Rather than, and this one that the one that I said that I had to ring the police to do a welfare check, I was very sick 3 years ago. So I've been working here for eight years. I was really unwell 3 years ago. I didn't work for a year. And so lots of my clients had to then try and source other therapists. The number of them with this presentation that I have back tells me that I must be doing something okay to support this group of people. Yeah. Okay, so.
Yeah. I just put in a little note saying this is a place where you can speak about your clients, obviously, without a lot of information, and share things confidentiality and professionally.
Thanks, Philippa. That's a mishap on my behalf. I always assume that. Okay, sorry, Neville, you've now got my head going along a whole different path, because I've had numerous arguments with CAT teams, and we'll just leave that there. Okay, so how do we RT with BPD? I couldn't resist. It was so corny, I couldn't resist. All right, so in short, slowly and mindfully, as best not to overwhelm them or make them run a mile. So I'm going to go through now some of the strategies that I use with this client group. And this is where the slowly and mindfully comes in. I would love nothing more than to jump in and sort out some vaded states for a person, knowing that at somewhere along the line, that's going to be the best thing they ever could do for themselves. But I'm hoping, as you have been able to see so far, there's some really good reasons why that is not appropriate necessarily for this client group. It's not always not appropriate. I had an amazing session with a client who I've seen, 4 or 5 times last week. And most of our sessions have been me supporting her with meetings through DHHS or numerous other organisations that she has involved. And last week so it's not like I have put the steps that I'm about to say, I wasn't able to put those into practice. I did a little bit as I was just talking to her, but not formally. And she had an absolutely amazing session. She also doesn't have her children, and so her motivation for things to change was pretty severe. Okay, so my recommendation is to start with find resource.
I was going to say, yeah.
It's possible that with this group of people, you might have to actually spend some time creating a resource, or more likely you find another resource that can engage in responses that best adapt to the adult world. So a state that can be non-emotional or rational is a good start. They could well have one of these states that just hasn't been used for a long time because they've been in crisis after crisis after crisis. And when you're in that situation, your emotions get all out of control. Sometimes I will have to try and suggest situations where they might have had a state that was rational or in control. I might talk about, one of my favorites is, had they ever had a product that they need to return to a store? And have they been able to do that without losing it? Depends on the response from the shop assistant. But let's say the response from the shop assistant is, yes, we can refund that. At least they've started in a state that is able to kind of stand up for themselves.
State. What? Yeah.
We can accuse me of being a little bit narcissistic in a minute. Sometimes, worst case scenario, I have to ask my clients, what do you think I would do in that situation? And sometimes they can tell me. I have had people tell me that I would scream at the other person in the situation, which, I find heartwarmingly beautiful that that's the only response that they've got. And so then I will set about counseling them onto how I would actually respond to those situations. And so sometimes it's really slow going work. Okay, so if we can start to get a bit of a map going for this client group, it means that we start to have a list of states that are more able to function in the adult world, and generally they want to help. It also means that the client has time to feel safe working with me, and obviously the different style of therapy. Obviously, unless you've got clients who've been to numerous hypnotherapists and the likes, this style of therapy is often very different to therapy that they would have had in the past. So just remember that this client group can be quite fragile, even if they don't appear that way.
Yeah, they can be cranky and irritable.
Aggressive.
And
so they struggle with things that are uncomfortable. And so a lot of my therapy, and I'm aware that my voice has changed because I've changed from my teacher state to my therapist state. I work really hard to reduce those triggers so that we're not getting triggered at the start in the therapy room. Fast therapy is not always efficient therapy for this client group.
do you find too, there's lots of states that are just there, boom, 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 like this. So you can't even, it's like, oh.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Some session, none at all, then some, and then some you just do some amazing stuff really quick. You don't have to bridge because these, SADS 5 and SADS 6 I spoke to last session. And
so my notes have just gone a bit funny. Just bear with me. Okay, so other states that can be helpful to find at the start of therapy can be a state that can be mindful or present in the moment, awesome grounding state. Often they don't have that. This might be a state who can practice meditation. That's ideal. I love it when I have a client who's happy to practice meditation. Excuse me. I generally, if I've got a state who's happy to practice meditation, I generally direct them to YouTube. There's more meditations on YouTube than you can poke a stick at. Another state that's useful to find is a distraction state, but not the one that self-harms. So yes, we can get to the point where we are working with the state that self-harms to renegotiate their behaviour. However, the problem with self-harm is that it works. And so when I've got a client who self-harms, I will have the discussion where I say to them, we are not going to find another technique that works as well as self-harm. Same for if I've got a different client group, generally, sometimes. If I've got a client who uses drugs, where the reason they use drugs because it works for them. So they self-harm because it works for them. And often what I find is that when we as people find a coping mechanism or a retro-avoiding behaviour that works really well, it becomes our go-to behaviour for anything where we're distressed, not necessarily just one faded state. But if we've got 10 faded states, then our self-harm of our retro-avoiding behaviour becomes our go-to for all of them. Okay, so yes, so eventually we want to get to the state where we can renegotiate the self-harming behaviour. However, if we do that straight away, what I find is that the retro state that's self-harming will agree, yes, there's a better way to do stuff. But what will happen is first sign of crisis, and we're reverted back to our tried and tested method. And of course we have, I know some therapists who get angry. I know our public health system that gets angry and frustrated about that. I think that that's really reasonable. I think that I would do that too if I was in their position. So it's really good to try and find another state that can distract. Now, if I'm talking to another state that can distract, I'm going to have a little chat with the retro avoiding one as well. So quite often each session, I'll just have a little chat to them, and I'll just be like, you know, I know that you're really trying to help. I'm really trying to help too. I know that this behavior works really well for helping to feel like our emotions are regulated. The consequences of this behavior are becoming worse than the help that you're providing. And so I just gently counsel them over a number of sessions. Certainly if we haven't been able to get to vated state work yet. So nurturing state, this is really important actually. I don't know why nurturing state's so far down, but a nurturing state. And the reason that this is important is that when I do get to the point where I'm doing vated state work with this group of people, I want it to go smoothly. I really want it to go smoothly, because if it doesn't go smoothly, they're out. So I really like to find a nurturing state early on. So a state that can give nurturing to themselves, which often is difficult, which I'll get to in just a second. At least a state who can nurture somebody else or an animal, a kitten, unless we're also diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. That's okay, we'll just presume we're not right now. So if we can find a nurturing state prior to doing vated state work, then that nurturing state is there when I'm halfway through the vated state work, or predominantly through it, and I want to find a nurturing state who can help this child state. I want to know there's a nurturing state there, because sometimes there isn't. And there's a couple of things that can go wrong, if you like, with this client group and nurturing states. So the first one is that they don't have a nurturing state. The first one is that their life has been incredibly traumatic, and they haven't had role models who can role model what nurturing looks like. And so sometimes we have to try and what I will usually do in this situation is I'll find a state that can enjoy patting a kitten or an animal. Like, that's normally my go-to. Often even people who haven't been role modeled a nurturing state can feel that gentle warmth and loving from a baby animal. So what I will do is I'll find that state and then talk to that state about how do we move this nurturing from an animal to a person to themselves. The second thing that can often go wrong with vated state work with this client group is that they do have a nurturing state. However, when we ask the nurturing state to go and nurture hurt, another state jumps in and says, nope, not happening. I generally find if you listen really carefully, it's not the nurturing state who says that, it's actually another state. Yes, it can very much sound like it's the nurturing state. My general experience is that it's a different state. It's a state that is, which we'll put into the protector category. A retro state. And so they jump out because it's not, remember this client group, they don't feel safe in normal, healthy relationships. And so what we see as nurturing, they see as scary, or what we see as nurturing, they see as nurturing, but they don't believe that they're worthy of that nurturing. And so the protector state who comes out, they're protecting because they don't want the nurturing. What if the nurturing state doesn't stay? What if the nurturing state can't love them? What if the nurturing state, you know, like all of these fears, which are absolutely warranted, I know they're not true. They don't know that they're not true though. So with blocking states, and this works with all the blocking states that we have spoken about, and obviously it's why I've got to it now. I don't know where this technique came from. I have absolutely no idea. What RT originally teaches with blocking states is that we have a chat with the blocking state and we say things like, you know, I know that you're here to help. I really want to help this client too. You're much more powerful than I am. I can only help if you allow me to help. Could you allow me to further help this client? If we've got a blocking state under this example, they say no. So, as I said, I don't know where it came from, but it's pretty rare for it not to work. So now I say to the blocking state, we want to be very complimentary. So with all retro states, we want to be very complimentary. They believe that they are doing the absolute best thing and the right thing for the client. And so again, thank you, blocking state. I usually say, so when I hear the state that's blocking go, no, they can't nurture, or when I know that there's a blocking state there, I normally just say, thank you for talking to me, state. Can I call you blocking? Just for the ease of, let's get through this so we can get back to doing what we need to do. And so I will just call them blocking. And I always say to them, if you've got a better name, you can tell me that when you're ready. So basically I'll say to the blocking state, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate that you're here. I love that you are trying to protect Jenny. I really want to help Jenny too. And I've been working with Jenny for a little while now, and we seem to have a good rapport and relationship going. I really, really want to help her. I'm wondering, blocking state, if you could sit over here next to me and watch on, and you can jump in if you need to, but what if you were to sit over here next to me, you're still there, and I could speak directly to the nurturing state? Almost always it works, almost always. And so then what happens is we are then able to get nurturing state to it's agreed that the nurturing state can nurture the little state. I'm just going through my client group in my head, and I don't think I've got any that hasn't. I've got one that really early on in my RT world, or my ego state world, I couldn't get the nurturing state to nurture the little state. However, later on, I still see her. Later on, we've been able to do that with that technique. So,
yeah, I've had parts that are really skeptical about this because I think it's so new.
Yeah.
There's like not a neural pathway there. It's like a little kind of thin spider web going across, just starting to build.
Yeah.
So I kind of get them to practice that and keep, talking. Yeah. But it is like, that's really good.
Am I right to keep going? Pip, is that right?
I'm all right. Are people okay to keep going if you need to go? I'm good. Yep. We've got the thumbs up.
I find an awareness state. I find awareness is a really useful state. Often people who present with these diagnoses do have behaviours that are difficult to sustain relationships with. Excuse me. So I find I have conversations with awareness states that kind of go a little bit like, I'll just, as though I'm just thinking out loud, I'll just say things like, you know, sometimes we can all be accused of manipulating, or we can be accused of doing things by other people. Other people accuse us of doing things. And sometimes it's really useful to have a state like you that can actually reflect on whether or not some of those behaviours are engaged in. Now, I believe that most of us engage in those behaviours over our lifetime. We're taught it from, you know, I think stereotypically any feminists are going to kill me in a second. Stereotypically, women are taught manipulative behaviours. I think that sometimes it's back in the day when you know, men were seen as the stronger, physically stronger sex. Women didn't have the ability to meet equally from a physical strength perspective. And so there had to be different behaviours that had to be developed over time. I don't believe that means all women are manipulative. I'm just trying to neutralise the idea that we all are capable of manipulative type behaviours. And so if we can make that a common thing that everybody has, then this group of people who already feel like they're a useless piece of crap. And so it's very difficult for them to have an honest reflection of their own behaviour, especially behaviours that they're constantly told are bad or manipulative or all the rest of that. And so I really want my client to feel like, you know what, like Melanie's probably engaged in manipulative behaviours. Sure, I'll tell them that I have. I'll give them examples if necessary, because I want them to feel so non-judged by me that we can actually do the work on these, that we can actually do the work that we need to. Okay, because yeah, remembering too that their biggest fear is abandonment. And so imagine that people in your life abandon you, real or imagined. Imagine your therapist does that too. That must really mean that what you believe about yourself is true. Okay, so I just want to, so that work is prior, so that work we're doing prior to vated state work. Sometimes what will happen is a vated state will come out while I'm doing that work. And sometimes I will be tempted to go, all right, let's just get in there and do it. But remembering that I need this client not to feel raw when they leave. And the chances are that if I do that vated state work, they're going to feel raw when they leave. Okay, so I've got a new client at the moment who has, this is her list of diagnoses. Borderline personality disorder, bipolar affective disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, childhood and adult, depression and anxiety. She's on a bucket load of medication. She's in her 50s and she has a daughter. I was just, she smokes a lot. I was just trying to remember whether she smokes pot or not, but she doesn't, thankfully. On her third session, it became really clear that she has got a really triggering relationship with her daughter, as in she gets triggered. I mean, no, I know her daughter gets triggered, but obviously her daughter isn't my client. So protocol, RT protocol would have said that we do the vaded state work, because clearly there's a vaded state there. Vaded with rejection, we'll go for. However, I was also really aware that I ran the risk. The other protector state. Okay, so I was aware that I ran the risk of re-traumatizing. Sometimes people in this group have a protector state who will shut down therapy completely. The last thing that I want to do is re-traumatize somebody. When I teach RT, I am really, really strict on it. I know that part of the reason that I'm really strict on it is because I know that I've done it. So back in my really early days, it's 11 years ago, I had a young girl with borderline personality disorder. She came to me with that diagnosis. I didn't give it to her. And there was a vaded state right there, ready to go. And so we do the vaded, we talk to the vaded state, and we go back to the trauma. Within 2 seconds, I reckon, 2 seconds it would have been, she was up and out of my chair and out of my room. And she had a friend with her. And of course I went, and it's dark outside in a not salubrious place in Frankston. And so of course I go and try and, you know, work with her, and would not have a bar of it, completely wouldn't have a bar of it. So she just wouldn't, she did not come back. I did not speak to her again. Her friend was with her. I mean, obviously I spoke to her doctor and all of the rest of that, but the damage was done. And so very quickly I learned that even though the vaded state is there, it's not always best practice with this client group to work immediately with that state, especially if they've got a protector state who's just going to shut down therapy. So this new client, I can tell you that she had a protector state who would shut down therapy. I have no doubt about it. Also the fact that the other reason why I knew that she had a protector state who would shut down therapy is because she's in her 50s and I look 15. And so automatically there's already a bit of a power thing going on here. Generally what happens is when they learn that I'm actually 42, then, you know, that reduces a little bit. Okay, so I knew that she was going to have a protector state that was going to shut down therapy. So once you get a state out that's going to shut down therapy, it's really, really hard to get, once you're offside with them, it is so hard to get back on side. So I work, okay, let's not make that another further issue that is going to be problematic in the therapy relationship. Okay, so yes, I wanted to do the vaded state work. No, I was not going to do it. So instead we were able to find a resource that was tough love. She'd been able to do tough love in the past. She had a brilliant example of when she was able to do tough love. And we anchored that state from memory, I think it was to a dog. Okay, so on leaving, she's feeling empowered. We've got tough love out. She's worked out that she can just think of the dog and tough love's out and we're good to go. I love this story because it's so typical. So next week, fortnightly, I'm seeing her fortnightly. She's on the NDIS. She has a lot of support. So she's on the NDIS. She's got 2 workers who come every week for an hour, for 2 hours each. So she comes back for the following fortnight and she's like, Melanie, it was really bad. And I'm like, oh, tell me. So Saturday, so I had her on the Friday. Saturday was good. Saturday, she felt empowered. She was on it. She was ready to go. Sunday, she forgot to take her medication in the morning. She is on antipsychotic, mood stabilizer, antidepressant, anti-anxiety. There's another one in there. I can't remember what it is right now. Sunday, so I haven't even spoken to a vapid state. There's been no vapid state work done here. Sunday, over and over and over, she is going in her head about whether tough love was a good move as a mother, whether she is a good mother. Absolutely, I kid you not, her child would have had a very chaotic upbringing. But I am not, there's no point me sitting there going, probably those reflections will lead you to that conclusion. So by Tuesday, she'd taken a medication, obviously. So she didn't realize that she hadn't taken a medication until Sunday night. She's got another handful of medications to take Sunday night. So she takes her morning medication again, obviously Monday morning. By Tuesday night, she felt that she'd put herself back together. So when she comes into therapy, she is not going to want to do that work again. And I said to her that I honestly believe, had you not forgotten your medication, then we wouldn't have had the fallout that we did. And she said, and I said to her, you know, what if we just put the therapy over there for a bit? And maybe we can come back to it when you're feeling a bit more stable. And she was down with that. Like, she could actually see the benefit that the therapy would have. And she's willing to give it another shot, which is a far sight better than she's never going there again. Now, obviously, what I expected was that we'd be able to get tough love out. But what would happen is that within 1 or 2 days, her vapid state's going to come back out because we haven't done any resolution work with the vapid state. But the vapid state's going to come out anyway. Even if I don't talk to tough love, the vapid state's going to come out anyway. It's being triggered and triggered and triggered. And so the idea is that if I could give her is that my photo of my children? If I could give her a couple of days where she actually felt I can be more empowered in this situation, then that's a good start for a win for her. What then happens is when she comes back and she can say, oh, for the first day, I was really good at bringing tough love out. By the second day, I crumbled. Yes, that's because we've got a vapid state underneath there. That's because we've got a traumatized state underneath there that I need to work with. Our goal is to be able to work with that state. So you can see how it puts us into, you know, like we're just setting it up for the next session.
Do you think it's helpful too to saying this to the client as well in a sort of way, that language too, that they get it because they live with it?
Yeah. And I am saying, yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely saying this. I'm not using the word vapid state. I'm saying we've got a state there who's stuck in a traumatizing situation. And so what happens is that when you're talking to your daughter, it's like she's pressing the trigger button and this little state is jumping out. Your daughter's pressing the trigger button and you, rational over here, is trying to catch the ball. But guess what? This little state is quicker, jumps out, takes the ball, runs off. We're not even in the same game now.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so fast, isn't it? Yeah, I've got a client. She can't stand her child coming to hug her. She's that traumatized, you know.
That's right. Okay, let me I just had to go back somewhere.
I had a couple of questions on, you know, when the vapid state's out and you're not ready, you know, your client's not ready. What's your favorite containment strategies? How do you work with that, Mel?
So I just say to the vapid state, I can see that there's a state here who's overcome with emotion right now. State, I really want to work with you. I need to work with some other states first. You've done a really great job at getting through this, I want you to know that you've already survived this trauma. And so I am going to work with some other states that can help client be able to deal with the adult world in a way that's not so chaotic. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you. And I'm here for you to talk to whenever you need to. And I generally just find that once a state is heard in any capacity, then they're like, okay, yep. They just feel a bit like, all right, she's got my back.
Acknowledgement and validation and yeah. And also I guess you're doing a bit of present day presentification, like, oh, she's actually an adult, but yeah. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. And I do a lot of psychoeducation with clients, with states. You know, I'll talk to states about, you know, did you know that Jane is an adult now? Like, that's exactly one of the things that I will say. And as an adult, she's got a whole lot of resources available to her that you didn't have back then. She's got some rational states, and purely due to the fact that she is an adult, she's got some resources available to her. So she can call the police, or she can ring somebody on the phone. She can walk away from a situation. These are things that you didn't have available to you when you were the one that was when client was 5 or however old client was. Yeah, and often that helps them to be like, oh yeah, I didn't. So yeah. So I guess in summary, I know that it can be really difficult to take your time with this client group. However, I certainly find that in taking my time with this client group, and you know what, it's hard working with this. It's hard working with this client group. I'm not going to lie that I do not sometimes get exhausted. When I am driving to a date and I have a suicidal client on the phone and an argument with the CAT team and I have to ring the police, it's not really my, you know, ideal Friday night. Thankfully, it doesn't happen very often. Ironically, this client I hadn't seen for quite a few months, and she, you know, like I've been seeing her for 8 years, but as is characteristic of this client group, she'll engage in therapy, drop out, engage in therapy, drop out. My rule for myself is that I'm always available for you when you come back. I don't say that to them. I don't want to encourage it, but I am. And so what happens is then over time, they learn that, you know what, like, she's got my back. That example doesn't, I reckon that example wouldn't even happen once a year for me. And, you know, I think often it's just knowing that this client group's got an appointment with me in 1 week or 2 weeks, or that I'm just in the background doing stuff, is, you know, that's just a level of support that they can learn to rely on.
Okay.
Which then gets us to the point where we can do some of the fated state work.
Yep, great, Mel. Great.
So yes, take your time. It's a fragile group of clients, even though they might not present like that. Find some helpful resources, anchor them, keep a note of them so that you remember them. I guess my other biggest takeaway is that it's really important that fated state work goes smoothly. And so because of that, I want to find a nurturing state before I do fated state work. I want to create a safe environment before I do fated state work. This is a client group that's really easily triggered. They've spent years weaving elaborate webs in order to protect themselves. And so it's not going to be that you find one fated state, you work with that fated state, expression, removal, relief, find resource, done. That's generally not what happens. Often what happens is expression removal relief, find a resource, up comes another vaded state. And another vaded state or a retro state, or, you know, and so for me, I found that the best way that I can support a client through that is by obviously being incredibly non-judgmental about it, but also creating that safe environment before we do the vaded state work.
Nice. Thanks, Mel. That's really good. I had a question. Is that all right? Yeah.
Yes. Whoops.
Yeah, that's right. No, it wasn't a whoops. It was more like, oh, you mentioned distractors. There's Donna. She's state. So
all my photos.
Yeah, they're a bit blurry. Anyway, distractor states, you know, as a way to avert self-harming behaviours. I think that's really good. Can you give us some examples of distractor states some people, your clients, have come up with? Because that might be handy to have in our back pockets.
Yep. So often by the time I get clients who self-harm, often, as I said, they've been through numerous therapists before. The benefit of that is other therapists have given them a whole load of other distraction techniques, which, remember, are not, colouring in is not equivalent to slicing up your arm. Like, it just doesn't have the same, you know, the same result.
Not but endogenous endorphins coming.
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that I will, unless my person has anorexia, where I am not going to suggest that they go for a run. But physical exercise is a really good one if they have the motivation to do it. I also don't expect that my clients have capacity to necessarily put things in place. Whilst hopefully, unless I'm in complete denial, I do not have most of the symptoms of BPD. I have certainly been in a place where I've been incredibly unwell and not had capacity to implement the long list of strategies that people continuously gave me. And so I have a complete understanding for my clients that they just might not be in a space to be able to implement those strategies. And I think that that's really important because, again, when we look at the public mental health system, who absolutely expect that it's paramount that this group of clients put other distraction techniques into place, it fails to understand that sometimes they just don't have the capacity for it. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have the discussion. And so we'll talk about exercise. There's another one. We'll talk about exercise. We'll talk about colouring in. We'll talk about the elastic band on the wrist. We'll talk about holding ice cubes. We'll talk about Candy Crush, because I personally got myself addicted to that for a reason. We'll talk about TV, about music, about
games, anything that's harm minimizing, really, isn't it? It's harm minimizing. It's kind of shifting away, and it's giving them a sense of some shift and behavioral control too.
Yep.
Towards a choice. And
if they're on PRN, if they're on medication, that's PRN. So I can't actually remember what PRN stands for in Latin, but when I worked in the psychiatric hospital, we used to call it a pill right now. So a PRN medication is medication that you might be able to take a Valium as needed. If that's something that's available to them, then I'm going to prefer that they take a Valium or a Serapax and slice up their leg.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, mind you, yeah, they can get very good at it, as well as reviewing it too, by the way. You know.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts or reflections, having heard a really informative, insightful talk with Mel and her experience working with borderline complex PTSD? I think that's such a much more accurate description of what this client group is going through as well. Hopefully, I think the ICD-10 has recognised that complex post-traumatic stress disorder exists. and moving away from that, but not the DSM-5, hopefully. Anyone have some questions, thoughts, reflections? It's been brilliant.
Do you have a question, Donna?
Donna, we can't hear you. Gosh. Oh, she's got the headphones. Have you? Yeah, we can hear you now.
I was just thinking right back when you were talking about that valid state that you're saying when you're giving the scenario about, you know, the ball game. Yeah, so you, that other one came in really quickly to take over. What did you do with that other state then? Did you just let it go back into its own shell or leave it alone while that other one takes over? Or
so the one that takes over is the vaded state.
Yep.
So
grabbed the ball and took off. And it goes really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the example that I give to them, as this is what can happen when you're outside of therapy, when you're in the adult world. And so they don't have a lot of control over what to do about that, because once a vaded state is out, then, you know, like there's no rational, there isn't rational thinking. The reality for this client group is if they weren't seeing me, it's only that I have got the ability to be able to work with that vaded state that makes, that causes me the dichotomy, if you like, of whether to do that or not. So most therapists, most talk therapy doesn't deal with that vaded state. And so if they were, one side of me sees it as a cop-out and the other side goes, no, this is what's in the client's best interest. And so if they were seeing another therapist, this vaded state would be jumping out all the time anyway. It's just that what I'm offering them is an explanation as to why that happens. And so at least then, at some point, when I say to them, when we get to vaded state work, and I say to them, you know, like, how's your week been? I don't ask that question if I want to actually do resource therapy. How's your week been? And they tell me that this situation happened, and they were going to deal with it emotionally, and then they give me this example. So then we can start talking about it. And once we start talking about it, that we're preparing them more for that work.
Yeah.
If I'm doing a session with them and I'm not up to vaded state work, so with my new client, there was no way I was going to be doing vaded state work with her, even if a vaded state had jumped out. And so what I would do in that situation, if the vaded state jumps out, that's where I would say to them, thank you so much for being here. You have done an amazing job for all of these years. I really want to be able to help your space be safe on the inside. I just need to work with some of these other states first so that we can create a safe environment. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Oh, there's one thing I forgot to mention. I can't believe I forgot it. Sorry. When I get to vaded state work with this client group, often this client group's had a lot of therapy. And so somewhere in having that a lot of therapy is this idea that we have to be our authentic self in all situations. And I think that I want to scream the next time that somebody with this diagnosis tells me that that is their goal. I am not my authentic self in all situations. I have a beautiful little part. I use this example a lot. I have a beautiful little part. Her name is Deep. She sits over here somewhere. Her name hasn't always, well, her name's always been Deep, but I used to call her Needy because, you know, well, she's needy. Sorry, I can hear her arguing with me. So she's resolved. She's in a safe place. I've got no idea what her, I cannot even remember what her trauma was. She is surrounded by zebra bums, which gets me to my next point in a second. I do not take her dating on Tinder. That would be completely irresponsible of me to take her dating on Tinder. And so if I was being my authentic self, presumably I would take her dating on Tinder. But guess what? She's going to be re-traumatized pretty damn quickly, because there's a world fraught with rejection on Tinder. And so with this client group, when I get, I do this a lot. I definitely do it with this client group. I'll do the weighted state work. I will find the resource, so nurturing state, that is then helping her who's now happy, or love, let's go with love, just makes the example make more sense. So nurturing is now with love, safe on the inside, reading a book. I will then find another resource who is like the Xena warrior princess, or the army leader, or something to that effect, that can protect, that can put an extra layer of protection around love and nurture and the nurturing state. And so mine, that's where the zebra bums came in. One time at Werribee Zoo, I'm on the bus with my kids, and the zebras have turned their bums to us, and the person on the bus who's giving us the talk says, that's what zebras do when they don't want to have a bar of you. And so for whatever reason, actually it was in a demo, and Philippa, I just remembered it was in a demo, and Philippa was in fact the therapist in the therapy training that we were doing, who was the therapist on this particular occasion. So I'd totally forgotten that, because I had to access her, right? So I just had to access her, which then she brought with her the memory of this. And so I've got zebra bums protecting her. So often I will, yes, so I'll do whatever, a creative bubble, a force field. A force field's, pretty cool. I say things like, a force field, it's not restrictive in space. It's as wide as, you need it to be. But what I'm trying to do is create an extra level of protection. I had a client, one of my ones that I've been working with for a long time. We had a really fragile state that we were working with last session. And just give me a sec so I can remember this. Had a really fragile state. She was, I left her, I can't remember what her name is, but I left her snuggling with a nurturing state. I then had a protector state, and then I had the state that had this authentic self ideal. And I spoke to authentic self, and I said, I understand that you want to be your authentic self. You can't let her out in those situations because it's not safe for her, and she's going to be re-traumatized. And obviously I had to have a bit of a discussion about that. But I really felt that we had okay, we get this. We understand that as a team, we need to really protect those beautiful love states. And they can come out in situations where there's 99.9% chance, 0.01% risk that there's going to be rejection or fear. But that's the only time that that's the only time that we let them out. And for the rest of the time, and this is generally what I say, and for the rest of the time, they can be sitting in this beautiful space of love, emanating love to all the other parts that exist in there.
Nice.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good.
I remember that zebra bumps in front of that group. My God, with you, it was a 2-year-old state. It was really vulnerable. It was really.
Yeah, she was. Yeah. I do remember what her issue was now.
I was like, oh my God, that was in front of 20 people. My first ever resource therapy demonstration.
And I'm not the client you want to be doing a resource therapy demonstration on. So poor old Philippa, did a great job.
Oh my gosh, I had competing states out then, because there was like this group of people watching me, therapists trying to be the therapist. That was hilarious. Yeah.
One of my states was completely non-compliant.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there and I'm saying, come on, stop making this difficult for her.
It was like, yeah, it was, different parts popping out. Yeah. 20.
I've got one more question, if I can ask you, Melanie, too. You're saying about the client cutting themselves. I've got a client at the moment who does it. I work in a rehabilitation centre.
Yep.
And I've got a client who's cutting themselves at the moment. And at the moment, I've got them drawing on themselves rather than hurting themselves.
Yeah, awesome.
So would that be like to say that the client is in that nurturing, like that could be like a nurturing state for that client almost, for themselves?
I don't know whether that could be the state that does. I'd say it's not the state that self-harms.
Yeah.
I'd say it's another state.
A protector. It's a protector. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the ability to distract. But yes, protector state. So they're still protecting the client from feeling these overwhelming emotions.
Yeah.
They're able to do it in a different way to actual self-harm. But drawing on themselves, I can't believe I forgot that one, but it's a brilliant.
Yeah, that's what I get to do. That's what I did. And I was just wondering if I'm doing the right thing for that, then if that's bringing out the right state. Because I haven't done no state work with her or anything because I'm only learning this. But I was just, when you brought it up, I thought, oh God, am I doing the right thing with this client now?
Absolutely. And it works really well if they use a fine point pen.
Yeah, that's what I've got, just felt pens I have.
Still better than the actual.
Right.
And then there might be a transfer. You might be eventually able to get them transferring that to paper.
Well, that's what I aim to. I try to. We do a lot of art therapy. We do, but at the moment I've just got her drawing on her legs, so she's doing like semi-permanent tattoos all over herself at the moment.
And people do get tattoos. I've got one client who she used to have a tattoo appointment every 2 weeks.
Oh wow!
And that absolutely took has the most amazing tattoos. But that definitely took this. So she started because she was getting tattoos over her self-harm scars.
Yep.
And then what happened is that became,
that.
I've probably been seeing her for 10 years as well. I don't think she's actually self-harmed since I started seeing her. But she was getting tattoos when I first started seeing her. So yeah. The other thing that for people who self-harm is I try, and it's hard to do, but I try and get them to, sometimes I write a list out for them myself. Most of my clients go home with a Post-it note of, I'm like, we worked with this state and this state is now happy and they're with nurturing. And so I'll say to them things like, if you're feeling really distressed, remind yourself that hurt is now safe with nurturing. Remind yourself that, and that sometimes we have like a leftover, I just view it as a leftover neural pathway, but a leftover, we've got used to behaving a particular way in a particular situation. And so sometimes when I just give I talk to the conscious. I know I am a clinical hypnotherapist. I'm very aware that in hypnotherapy, we don't really care about the conscious mind, but I actually think I think it's really important. The reality is that we've got one. And so I believe that we need to use it. And so when I give them a Post-it note, I'm giving the conscious mind an understanding of what we've done today. And I'm giving the conscious mind a strategy for if they start to feel overwhelmed because that's what they're used to feeling, then remind yourself, this is where that state is, and they're safe and they're okay. And move on from there. So.
Okay, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other questions? Because thank you, Mel, for your time. And I just want to check in and thank you for staying quite a bit longer. It's been really intriguing and interesting, invigorating. Anyone else have anything they'd like to ask?
Just a quick one, if I can just ask. Thanks, Melanie. Wonderful presentation, and great to get real life experience from you, especially in the protectors and stuff, and the IFS, which I also really quite enjoy that concept. But going back to the start, you're talking about like on the third session, normally quite often you'll get a protector jump in. But with borderline disorders and those kind of things, how many of these people are actually sent to you and they protect right from the start and there's nothing wrong with them? You know, nothing wrong with me, you know, you can't help me. Because it seems like some of these people, like 5 years or 10 years, it's not quick therapy, as you said. So can you comment on that right from the start, where they're not actually prepared to change?
Yep. So all of my clients are sent to me. They're all voluntary. They are all, they're all voluntary. I work at a Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander specific rehab, drug and alcohol rehab. So they're still voluntary, but they're often on bail. But they're still voluntary to do the therapy, although, you know, if they want a report written by me, they need to come to therapy. I guess, so all of my clients are sent to me through, I'm a psychologist, so they're sent to me through GPs. That's why I will have clients who it's taken 5 years to do a resource therapy session, because they absolutely weren't ready to change. Like, that's absolutely right. And mostly it's fear. Mostly it's just the fear of what happens if we undo that Pandora's box. There are some clients who, if I have a client, there's one right there who's in her early 70s, I probably won't do Vated state work with her. She will probably, I suspect that she won't get to the point where she's like, yep, I actually really want to resolve this stuff. But I will try my best to do work, you know, around that. She's probably only going to live for another 5 years. Do we spend that? It's a, you know, it's a hard call. I mean, it's not my choice to make, obviously. But yeah. Although interestingly, the young girl with a lot of, so she has 4 children who are not in her care, lots of domestic violence, lots of childhood abuse. We started with so the first number of my sessions were talking to her, just like in a roundabout, like often I'll talk to people's states and they don't know I'm talking to their states. Like I'll speak to the states, like their eyes are open. Almost all my work, I just get them to close their eyes straight away, just so that they can internally focus from the start. And, you know, if I laugh because an aggressive state's come out, they can't see me. But I find aggressive states, like I find them really amusing because I think they're so beautiful. But so this young lady, like I was talking to her, I spent probably like 4 sessions, obviously just being there for support. But at the same time, when I would have a conversation with her, I would be like, you know, like it would be really good to be able to work with that state. One of her biggest issues was aggression. And so as it happened beautifully, obviously there's intervention orders all over the place, back and forth between different people. And as it happened beautifully, at one point she was on the bus and one of the people that, you know, she's had an aggressive history with was also on the bus. And so the girl that she had the aggressive history with started being verbally abusive. And so she got up and punched her in the face. Bless. So thankfully, that was like a crisis point because I was involved with her then. We could have the discussion about how could you have responded differently and what was difficult that didn't allow you to respond differently. And I was able to say to her that the reason that you punched her in the face is because you honestly believed that yours and your daughter's life was in danger. You know, the verbal assault is enough for your protector parts to go, oh my God, we need to get in first or we are in physical danger. Mm-hmm. And so I was then able to say to her things like, you know, like, that was really important in your past. you wouldn't be alive today if that was not how that state had set themselves up. And so, and then I sort of said to her, you have a lot of different resources available to you now that you didn't have back then. And so then we were able to get to the point where I was able to say to her, I can talk to that state. We can help that state only come out when the body is in physical danger, and we can find another state to come out. And essentially, I'm still like, fingers crossed. I saw her last week. Her DHHS worker had been out. So we did the work, like maybe a couple of 2 or 3 sessions later. She responded incredibly well. Her DHHS worker's been out and is like, what's happened? Like, you're so much calmer. So fingers crossed, hopefully. She's got heaps, like there's heaps of Vated states in there. But that's just one example of how I've been able to go, okay, this client wasn't really ready to change, but with a bit of counselling and coaching, we were kind of able to get there quicker than, you know, what on paper it would suggest.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
It's okay.
Anyone else have it before we close the session? Because I'm aware of Mel's donated her time. Thank you. And thank you all for coming, because we wouldn't be able to run this if you weren't interested. And really, it's amazing. Yeah, it's been really inspiring and rewarding and intriguing hearing that, working with this difficult client group. Thanks, Mel. And sort of similarities in presentations and how to apply probably more complex resource therapy presentations, and how you can adjust it to this client group, because it is applicable. And what you're saying is pacing, front loading those resources, I think is really important, and just titrating the dose of therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, you know, there's many times I just want to jump in there, get it done, and be like, whoa, we're ready to go. But it's just, and I've had sessions myself, you know, like I am, most people would suggest that I am a high functioning person in society. And I have had therapy sessions myself that have taken me a week to put myself back together for. And that's me with a whole lot of resources available to myself. So for that group of clients that don't have that,
so that awareness too. And it's great to have therapy and the psycho ed and all this great information you've given us here. Is it? So we're just going to draw the circle to a close in a way. Is there just want to say goodbye and a word that you're is coming with or leaving with here today before I just think, Melanie, thanks for coming.